another video in Dear Piggy's HTML CSS course. So in this video, we are going to be working with divs as well as the hover effect. So this should be a very exciting video in terms of what's going to happen. Personally, this is one of my favorite topics to teach because I think it's one of the coolest things that I've done in HTML CSS. So let's jump right in. The first thing we need to talk about are divs. So divs are tags. There are like any other tag. You have the opening tag, you have the closing tag with the slash, and you just do div. You can add classes or IDs to the tag, anything you want. It's basically a normal tag. So if you take a look at this picture over here, you'll see it's just div. You can assign it a class if you would like, and backslash div. Just like any normal tag. However, this is basically an empty container. It really does nothing, but when you want to style things, you can style it as a whole. Or if you just temporarily want a placeholder that essentially does nothing, or you want to organize your code or label it, you would use these divs. Now, it sounds kind of lame when I'm describing it, unfortunately, but divs are used all the time in coding. So these are one of the biggest topics in, well, just HTML in general. So I don't know, I'd say they're kind of important. So let's go ahead and try it out really fast. This is going to be a longer video in terms of slides. Let's see how much we can get done. Create our REPL here. Clever mean decimals is just me, I think, but I love looking at what names they come up with for the REPLs because it's always kind of funny. Bring my script down here. Now I'm going to create my first div. So take a look, we're going to do div and then semicolon div, just like this. So if I run my code, of course, nothing is going to happen on our screen because it's an empty container. But I can also put things inside of it. I can say, this is my header 1. And I can say, welcome guys. I can also put a paragraph inside of it that's kind of like slightly smaller, and so glad you are all watching my video. So now if this is placed in a div, currently it's going to show up as normal, but if I want to style it, instead of having to style just the header and the paragraph by itself, I can style it together as a whole. And how I would do that is I would go ahead and assign it to a class or an ID. In this case, I prefer IDs, so we're going to stick with an ID, and I can say this is the title sort of thing, the top. So now if I go back and style this, I can say hashtag title, just like we style all IDs, and I can give the entire thing a background color. So I'm going to give it a background color of black. I want to kind of make this kind of cool. Let's give it some actual text, the actual color of white, and no additive symbols. I'm going to give it a border of lime. So this is going to look kind of cool. If I run my code now, you'll notice, well, I did my border wrong, unfortunately. It's supposed to be like 3 pixels solid line, right? This is how you do your border correctly, guys. Run your code and you will notice that everything has been styled as a whole. So this now looks a lot better than separate little boxes for every single header or every single paragraph that you style. To make it look a little bit better, I'm going to do padding, and I'm going to say like 20 pixels. Remember, padding is the space inside of the border. So now we have some space over here. It's not just squeezed up on the sides. This is what it would look like if you did your paragraph and your header separately. So let me go ahead and put this in the paragraph and the header separately, and we'll kind of see the difference. Let me comment this out. I'll go ahead and comment this out just so that you guys can see the difference really fast. And then I'll run my code. So now it looks like this. And while there's nothing wrong with this, sometimes this isn't exactly the look that we're going for. So when you're going for that complete look for one complete section, you kind of want to stick with your divs. And most of the times as you get into very, very complicated websites, as I've seen before, you always wrap all your sections in div because you're going to style every section differently, but you want it to look kind of like together and combined instead of everything separate. So that was just kind of the intro to divs. Now let's get to the fun part. So the fun part that I was talking about was the hover effect. So previously, every time we run our code, that's kind of it. What shows up on the screen, that's it. Now what we're going to be doing is every time we hover on something, something different is going to happen. So unfortunately, I have to get rid of my really cool, eccentric looking box and border here, but it's okay. I actually kind of like this color combo. Maybe it's just me, but let me bring this back and I will take this down to the bottom and comment it out. I don't know why I'm not deleting it. Maybe because I actually like this color scheme a lot. I don't know, guys. Maybe I'm going crazy. You tell me. There we go. So how I'm going to do this is there are going to be a few steps. First, I'm going to create an empty div. So I'm just going to do a div with nothing else in it. Then I'm going to go to my styling because it styles the same way as any other tag would. It's the exact same as any other tag you would style. So if you need help on the styling, I made a video for that a couple videos ago, something like that. Go take a look. Then I'm going to basically give it a height and a width. So that's the biggest difference here. Since this div is empty, I need to give it a height and a width as well as the color and everything so that we can actually see it. And then we're going to work some magic. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create my, empty div over here. So we'll run my code. There's nothing over here because your div is empty. Let's bring it back to the CSS and let's get it going. So I'm going to say div because I want to style the div, and first thing I need to do is I need to make it show up on our screen. So I'm going to give it a height of 100 pixels, and I'm going to give it a width of 100 pixels, and then I need to give it a color because if I run it now, nothing's going to show up because I haven't given it a color yet. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to give it a background color of let's do black. I don't know, maybe I'm really vibing with the black lime color scheme today. I don't really know. Okay, so now if I run my code, you'll see that a black square appears on the screen. So everything is going well so far. We've given our div a height and a width, and we've kind of told it to like appear on the screen. Next, just because I'm feeling fancy today, I'm going to give it a border of lime green. Lime. So then you'll run your code and it looks like this, a little bit thin. Let's stick with 5 actually. There we go. So this is our div. This is where our magic is going to happen next. What we're going to try to do is when we hover on this div, we want it to change. We want the height to change, the width to change, the background color, the border. We want everything to change. So how we're going to do that is we're going to come down here in our styling, and we're going to say div : hover. So what this means is it's saying, this is what my original div should look like. However, when you do div : hover, you're saying that code, this is going to style the div when you hover over it. So maybe this doesn't make as much sense right now, but after we style it and we hover over it and do some experiments, then I think you'll understand it more. So first we're going to change the height. And I love playing around with this personally. I'm going to make it 200 pixels. Then I'm going to change the width because when I hover over it, I want it to get bigger. So I've changed it to make the height and the width bigger. I want the background color to change to white. But then I want my border to change to 5 pixels solid. How about magenta? I like that. There we go. So what this means is that originally when we run our code, just looking at this div over here, it's going to follow this styling. However, when I hover over my div, it's going to follow this styling over here. So when you do div colon hover, basically what that's saying is when you hover over your div, it's going to change into what you've styled over here. So guys, this is really cool because just using CSS and HTML, we've accomplished something that moves. And it looks pretty darn cool to me, in my opinion. One last thing I want to talk to you guys about is one of the most important keywords, the most important properties in this sort of hover effect. It's the transition keyword. And when I hover over this, you'll notice that it changes immediately, like snap, really, really fast, which is fine, perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But sometimes I want it to kind of change a little slowly, give us some time to adjust. This is where the transition comes in. The transition property is going to tell us, it's going to set the time frame for how long it takes each property to change. So the transition property always goes in the original div. So you're just going to do transition here. And so transition, remember, it sets the time frame for how long everything changes. So I want the height to change for 3 seconds. I want the width to change for 3 seconds. Usually if you set 1 to 3 seconds, you want all of them to change at the same time frame because it looks slightly better. Background dash color, I want it to change for 3 seconds. And finally, I want my border to change for 3 seconds. So basically, I've given the transition. I told it when you're changing, when you're going from the normal div to the hovering div, I want you to take 3 seconds for all of your properties. Run your code and you'll notice that when I'm doing this, it takes 3 seconds and it looks so cool, right? It looks pretty cool to me. It's a little slow for my liking, so I'm going to change this all to 2. Oops. Change this all to 2. Run your code, and you'll see it changes slightly faster now, and it's looking really great. So just to kind of sum it up a little bit, when you're doing your divs, you create an empty div here. Then you go to your styling, and then for your normal div tag, that's all like what we've learned from like 2 or 3 videos ago. You give it a height and a width, which is really important because you want to show up on the screen. Then you give it a background color of whatever you want. I did a border because I was feeling fancy. You don't always need to have a border. Then you go, I usually do my transition last, but that's up to you. Then you do div colon hover. What should you do when you hover over your div? I wanted to change the height to 200, the width to 200, the background color to white, and the border to magenta. Now, because I really like the, I don't know, kind of like the changing effect where it goes from like black to gray to white or white to gray to black, I'm going to set it a certain time frame. So how long should it take for each of these properties to change? Well, it's going to take the height 2 seconds, the width 2 seconds, the background color 2 seconds, and the border 2 seconds. So I usually set them all as the standard time and I just let it go. And that's the transition property. So that is the first hover effect. We will be using it quite often in the next couple of videos. Last thing for this video, I know it's a long one, guys, but stick with me. We're going to do the opacity hover effect. So this one is basically going to say when you hover over it, the transparency is going to change. First kind of design that I want to show to you guys is the opacity. Opacity means how transparent something is. So if it's very, very, very transparent, then it's going to be from 0.1. So the opacity scale is usually 0.1 to 1.0. The closer you get to 0.1, the more transparent it is. The closer you get to 1.0, the less transparent it is. So that's just something to keep in mind. I'm going to go back. So we still have an empty div, guys. This empty div is still there. I'm still going to give it a height and a width. But I'm going to get rid of all the rest of the properties, as well as everything in here except for the height and the width. I can get rid of the height and the width because if I don't mention it, then it's not going to change. However, now I'm going to set the opacity. Well, I need a background color, don't I? I need a background color, and I'm going to have that be aquamarine. Okay? Then I'm going to set the opacity to 0.2. So since 0.2 is very, very close to 0.1, it's going to be relatively transparent. So when I run my code, you'll see that this is, well, aquamarine. That's pretty much transparent. You'll see that if I get rid of this and run my code, this is what it's supposed to look like. But when I bring that opacity back, it's, well, very transparent. So that's opacity, how transparent something is. Then I'm saying, so we're still using the div : hover part because we still want something to happen when you hover over it. Except this time, nothing is going to change except for the opacity. When you hover over it, I want the opacity to go from 0.3 to not transparent at all. Remember, 1.0 means not transparent at all. So when you run your code, you'll notice this is still 0.2, pretty transparent. Then when I hover over it, it's aquamarine. So yeah, it worked. I bet we could use transition for this as well. So transition, opacity, I want it to be 3 seconds. Let's just see if it works, guys. I've never tried this before, but I'm kind of curious. Run your code, and yes, it does. So you can use this transition effect on your opacity as well. Another thing that you could do differently is you could set the opacity to 1.0. But technically, one thing that I want to make note of is that this line of code is pretty much useless because if you're saying opacity is 1.0, then you might as well just get rid of it, right? Because then it would just normally be aquamarine and the opacity hasn't changed at all. But then when I hover over it, I want the opacity to go to like 0.2. So now I want it to go, I want it to be more transparent when I hover over it. And again, I want the opacity to transition for 3 seconds. Run my code and you'll see, yeah, there we go. It's turning lighter and lighter, and then when I unhover, it's turning darker and darker. So guys, in this video, we covered 3 big topics. So great job, guys. We worked on divs, which are one of the fundamentals of styling, honestly, which they're basically empty containers that organize code and style code as a whole. And then we worked on the hover effect, which is basically the tag name : hover. Then finally, we did the opacity hover effect, where we just changed the opacity. So guys, that's it for this week's HTML CSS tutorials. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.